Hey, my friends. I'm so glad you're here as I talk to a guy whose story has intrigued and fascinated me. Former lead singer of a contemporary Christian music or CCM band called Hawk Nelson. Made headlines a few months ago. I guess it's been a couple of months or several weeks as he came out as a non-believer in God on Instagram. Did I say that fairly, my friend?
Yeah.
You came out and you said...
Fairly. I noticed you wording that carefully.
I didn't say atheist.
Yeah.
Because I don't know where you are. If somebody says, "Are you an atheist, Jon?" How do you respond to that?
Right. Well, I mean, at first I was like, well, I don't know that I would call myself an atheist, because I think at the beginning, my understanding of the word atheist meant that it's someone who believed there was definitively no God. And I've learned since then, and, correct me if this is not correct, but that my understanding now is that the word atheist means someone who lacks a belief in God. And that is, I guess, a pool that I'm at the very least dipping my toes in.
Well, people... Yeah, we're all eager. I mean, I'll admit to that first inclination to think, oh, I so want him to be in my camp, right?
Sure.
Because we're tribalist. And we're like, oh, look, now we've got somebody who can talk about the whole experience of the faith and Christian music, but he's now an atheist. And I had that just sort of microsecond of excitement before I paused and took some of my own advice and decided not to get hung up on the label. I'm more interested in your journey. Let's talk about Hawk Nelson. A lot of people in my audience are just now being introduced to the band. I sort of did some homework. You tell me how I do on this.
Sure.
Canadian Christian band, rock and pop funk. I understand that was sort of mitigated a little bit as you took over as lead singer 8 years ago. It was formed back in 2000. 8 studio albums, pretty impressive resume. Songs including Bring 'Em Out was featured in a 2005 film called Yours, Mine, and Ours with Dennis Quaid and Rene Russo. The band, I think, had a cameo in that film. Is that right? You guys were on screen for a second?
Yeah, we actually got to be on set and in the movie, yeah.
Voted Favorite New Artist by CCM Magazine in their Reader's Choice Awards, February 2006. You got some video time on VH1 that same year. You played, I love the names of these big Christian festivals like Creation Fest, or whatever. You guys did plenty of those. Winter Jam, a host of live concerts, picked up a Grammy nomination back in 2008. The original lead singer and co-founder Jason Dunn left the band in 2012, replaced by you, Jon Steingard. And I want to know about you. I mean, I was looking at your discography, and you guys were like sold out, all in, pro-Jesus, Christian message, heaven and hell type stuff. I mean, tell me about the band.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, so we all grew up, in a Christian environment, in Christian culture, and sort of toward the late 90s, like right around the year 2000, there was this, where we're from in Ontario, Canada, there was this whole vibrant community of like young musicians and people in bands. And so like, that was like a really normal part of our culture. And it was sort of very tied in with youth groups and churches and stuff like that. And initially, when we started taking the band stuff really seriously, I was the guitar player. Just for your audience, for clarity, I was the guitar player before I was the singer. So when I became the singer in 2012, that's not when I joined the band. I joined the band in 2004.
I see.
But yeah, early on, very like pop punk sort of music, and there was this thing going on in Christian culture at the time where Christians wanted sort of Christian versions of popular bands, because there was this sort of like movement of like, don't listen to secular music, listen to Christian music. If you like Blink-182, instead of listening to them, listen to Hawk Nelson, like that kind of thing. And so I think early on in our career, we were a little bit more vaguely positive. And we're just sort of a Christian alternative to bands like Blink-182 or Good Charlotte.
When I was in Christian radio, we used to call them God or Girlfriend songs. I don't know if you guys did that, but you talk about
we were
love.
very guilty, definitely very guilty of that.
Because crossover, I don't know if that was a big term when you guys were playing, but
sure,
back in the 90s when I was a Christian broadcaster, the holy grail was, man, if you could get this Christian song on pop and rock radio, like mainstream radio, and it catches fire. Do you guys have those sort of designs on the secular, quote unquote, secular music industry?
I mean, honestly, I think at the beginning, our philosophy was very intentionally like, we want to make music for anyone, for anyone, anywhere. Like that was sort of our approach. I don't think we ever thought like, oh, let's try and go mainstream, or, oh, let's try and go Christian. Like it was sort of like, we just wanted to play for, anyone who cared.
I mean, the record companies, certainly at some point were the record companies like, were they trying to package you?
So initially we were on this label called Tooth and Nail out of Seattle, and their approach to that stuff is pretty hands off. Like they were always known for being a label that would sign bands that had Christians in it, but wasn't like overtly Christian. That was sort of their sweet spot. And so they were really like not pushing us to be one or the other.
Because we got to talk about you don't have to throw your former industry under the bus. I'm not asking you to throw it under the bus, Jon, but man, I was there. I saw the airbrushing, what we need is somebody who's, you're young, but not too young, and you're attractive, but not like lusty. You're edgy, but not over the top.
Yeah, I think female artists had a lot harder of a time walking that line. Just because of the nature of like, it's, guys are a lot more visual than girls are. And so when you've got a female artist, I mean, her in Christian music, female artists have to walk this line where like, it's a fact that if you're more attractive, it helps. But if you are coming across too, like you say, lusty, I guess.
I don't know what the word is, but yeah, I mean, if you generate,
it's harder for women,
sexual desire in the audience more than just simply being like benignly attractive.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to adopt that phrase. I think I'd like to think of myself as benignly attractive.
You are. Well, I mean, you come out of a Christian background. Did you always do what you did,
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, we were a lot more vague in our sort of approach of dealing with matters of faith and our music. But as time went on, that culture did change, and there was more of a desire amongst, Christian music listeners to have really overtly faith-based messages in the music. And I think we responded to that and tried to write music that was more along those lines. And if I sort of plumb the depths of my own motivations during that time, I think it was mixed. Like I think part of me simply saw what the market wanted and wanted to deliver that, as you try to do when you have a business. And then part of me really genuinely believed it and was really excited about the idea of speaking more openly about matters of faith.
I'm interested in, we see this in church services. I saw it in contemporary Christian music. And it was probably, to me, most evident in the concerts. Yeah. I don't want to call it manipulation, but I mean, come on. You come out big. The emotions are high, hands in the air. And then let's say there's kind of a lull, and then there's a heartfelt moment, and then there's another big moment, and then you finish soft and maybe have I don't know. They still do altar calls in Christian music these days, Jon?
It depends. We never did as a band. That was always something that we felt uncomfortable with. And, for a variety of reasons. But I mean, I remember playing a show at a church one time, and the pastor the fact that we don't do altar call, like he just assumed that we do altar calls at the end of every show. And he was like, why are you even doing this if you don't do altar calls? And we were like, sorry.
Like it's not a conversion experience, why bother?
Yeah. Our approach was always that we wanted to make music that was like encouraging to people. And then what exactly form that took, sort of changed over time. But we were never, strictly speaking, trying to evangelize with our music. I don't think that was ever, like, at least for us, not a specific goal.
Back in the 90s, we saw altar calls giving way to sort of more of a nebulous call to go out and pursue truth. But I was interested in, when you'd see the altar call happen at concerts. There was a guy named Mylon Lefebvre, had a band called Broken Heart, and he'd do these huge altar calls at the end, and several others did. And so they'd bring them in. They had counselors at the front. They'd take people into the back. They'd kneel and say the salvation prayer. But then
I've seen that sequence thousands of times.
Well, what happens though when the band and the counselors and everybody else, like the next day, they're gone. And so what happened is that you had this highly charged conversion experience, and you've got these what we called baby Christians who have no idea what to do next. And I mean, they're almost sort of abandoned at step one in the process. You saw some of that?
And that was that was always the reason that we gave when we were explaining why we didn't do altar calls, because we weren't really interested in creating this sort of experience for people and then just going on to the next city. So our approach was always like, look, if you as the local church want to do a message and tell people about Jesus specifically and invite them to, pray the prayer and go through whatever process, like if you want to do that, then you can do that, because you'll be the people still in their community that can provide them support and stuff like that.
I remember when Stryper would come out and they would throw these New Testaments with the Stryper logo into the audience. I don't know. Stryper, I guess, is still around.
Really? I didn't know about that.
They had these New Testaments, and it had Stryper's logo on it. And like during the concert, they would come out and just chuck a ton of them into the audience, which I guess was their way of literally spreading God's word. I'm not sure what that accomplished. I don't remember anybody really actually reading the material that was thrown out.
I think I would have. I think at any point in our career, I would have been uncomfortable with a Hawk Nelson logo on anything like the Bible.
Like just link it straight to God.
I think that would have somehow been a red flag for me, I think.
You always a believer, Jon, back from your earliest memories?
Yeah. So my dad's a pastor. I grew up in a Christian home. I remember sort of praying. The first time I remember like sort of praying the sinner's prayer was when I was like 4 or 5, and in our backyard, my dad and I camped out in our backyard one night, and he told me, the story of Jesus, and, asked me if I wanted to accept him into my heart. And I did that. And then I think as a teenager, I had a few years where I was like I was fiercely independent as a teenager. So I definitely spent some time asserting that independence. And then I think I hit a point where I sort of re-engaged with church, and that felt like sort of a rededication to faith. I think at the time I thought, well, this is me coming into my own faith as an adult, which I was like probably 19 at the time. So at that time, I'm sure I would have used the word adult for myself, but looking back now, I'm not sure I could do that.
I mean, the implications of saying the salvation prayer at 4 or 5, right? You are essentially being asked to take responsibility for your eternal destiny at a point when you know nothing about the world. Would you agree with that, Jon?
I totally would agree with that. And so that's one thing that, I think, and I think most Christians now would say like, well, it's not like about that moment. It's about the process that you enter into the rest of your life. But I don't know what to do with this, because it's natural for every parent to base their approach on parenting on their deepest held beliefs. Like, how could you do anything else, right? And so for my parents, like, they believed this stuff very deeply. So of course they were going to, talk to me about it. And now I'm a parent. And so part of this process for me has been, what do I teach my kids? And that question, as I was sort of deconstructing my faith over the last couple of years, that question haunted me. I mean, I started going to therapy. I really wrestled with, what do I believe about, the nature of existence and the world and God and, all that stuff.
May I ask, how old is the baby?
Oh, well, we have 2 kids. My son's 3 and my daughter's almost 2.
You sleeping at all? You guys got just pandemonium or?
They sleep great.
When do you get your life back normally when it comes to the overnights? Is that after the first year? Is that right? Or?
Yeah, probably for us. I mean, it's different for everybody. I think that, I always hesitate to make generalizations because every kid is so different, but both of our kids are good sleepers. And I always feel bad sort of saying that, because I know out there's some parent that's like, that's like, screw you, Jon.
Yeah. Thanks for rubbing it in, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have plenty of struggles in parenting, but luckily sleep doesn't tend to be the big one for us.
So, we're talking about family, pastor, dad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How's he doing, man? With all this, his freaking son just made a pretty crazy announcement on Instagram.
Yeah, it's been hard. I mean, this is not the first that he had heard me talk like this. My wife and I have been having conversations about this kind of stuff with our families in private for, at least a year before I posted anything. But I definitely posting it publicly made things really come to a head for sure. My parents have been super loving and super kind with me. I can see that it's been hard for them. They're trying to wrestle with, they have questions of like, did I do a good job as a parent? Did I do everything I could have done? Or did I do they've got people coming up to them saying, we're sorry to hear about your son, as if I'm like dead or something like that.
Yeah. I think with my own parents, we failed. Like if we had only done a better job of introducing our son to the love of Jesus, what if we had not allowed this to happen in his life, or maybe attended a different church? I mean, I can see them wrestling because, as you say, they were motivated morally. Like they felt like this was a critical moral thing that they needed to do as a mother and father. So.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And that was actually by far the hardest part of this process for me, was the impact that had on the people that I care about the most. Because my entire family is Christian. My wife's entire family is Christian. Most of our friends are Christian. Although over the last few years, I would say an increasing number of our friends are not. But yeah, just the impact that this decision and this revelation had on those relationships. Definitely by far the most challenging part of the process for me.
So your wife has been on a similar path? You guys been walking this together? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we come from strangely similar backgrounds, and I mean, maybe that's what drew us together in the first place, so maybe it's not so strange. But we're both pastors' kids. We both grew up in very charismatic evangelical churches. Both of us, from the perspective we have now, look back and realize that we sort of had questions and doubts for a long time. We just didn't always recognize them, or didn't always understand what form they took. And so both of us have been processing this very similarly. I would say I'm usually 1 or 2 steps ahead in the sense that I'm sort of willing to come to a realization maybe a couple of months before she finally gets there. But I'm also more of a reader with this stuff. I mean, when she reads fiction, and when I read mostly nonfiction. And so I've just been devouring like information and books and like perspectives. And one of the things I've enjoyed doing in this process is reading like a Christian apologetics book simultaneously with something that totally contrasts it, and just going back and forth between those two perspectives, just to make sure I don't get pigeonholed in just one point of view. And And my wife is less likely to undertake that sort of a rigorous, process. And so she checks in with me like, okay, so where are you at, honey? Like, what do you think now?
Well, you may have more of an activist nature, you may just be
That's true. Mm-hmm.
One of those guys who you want to get into the thick of it, and, hammer it all out.
And I think I feel more compelled to be public about it than she does. And the reason for that for me is that I was public about matters of faith for so long that I felt like to go quiet on this felt a little disingenuous to me, because it felt like I would be participating in a culture that says like it's okay to speak up if you believe these things, but it's not okay to speak your mind if you don't. And or if you have questions, like you need to shut up. Like I didn't want to participate in any kind of a culture that made people feel that. And so I've sort of been deconstructing in public over the last month or so, and that's been a really interesting process.
You're kind of like a science fair project on yourself, like watching the experiment play out in real time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've noticed that a lot of other Christians that have come out as not believing anymore, they tend to have gone through that process very privately, and then once they feel settled in it, they've gone public. And I'm not passing judgment on like the right way to do this stuff, but I got to a point where I was confident enough that I'm like, something is not right here. And once I got to that point, and additionally, once I knew that I could talk about this stuff without being bitter and angry, that was when I knew I was ready to talk about it more publicly.
Talking here with Jon Steingard, former lead singer of Hawk Nelson. I feel like I'm cheating you by saying that, because you do tons of other stuff. You're
I do.
What did I see? Film producer, video producer.
Yeah.
Tell me how does your life look at the moment? I'm going to get into your deconversion in just a second, but I mean, sure. How do I slate you for the audience?
Yeah. I don't know. Labels are hard for me on a lot of levels right now. But yeah, I got into doing film and video work 4 or 5, 6 years ago. And I was doing it on the side. Initially, it was because the band needed video content more and more often. And I was like, well, I can figure some of this stuff out. And so I started doing stuff myself. And when other artists saw that, when other musical artists saw some of the stuff that I did, they were like, okay, well, can you do some stuff for me? And I was like, okay, sure. And so it sort of started this side hustle, and that grew to this point where I was like, oh, wow, I can definitely do this for a living. And gradually I decided to move more and more in that direction. And we sort of spent about 2 years, like the years of 2017 and 2018. We sort of spent those years consciously winding the band down somewhat to begin with, just because I was doing more video stuff. I was a dad now. I didn't want to tour as much. And, our guitar player, Micah, our guitar player, Micah, he had a kid, and everyone was starting to do different things. And so film became that thing that I got into. And it actually sort of dovetails with the deconversion thing for me, because it wasn't until I realized that my career no longer depended on me holding any particular belief that I really felt the freedom to begin asking really hard questions. I think the whole time I was in the band, I maybe had questions, but I think I always stuffed them down, because the idea of processing those questions in an environment where it would threaten my livelihood, I think that scared me a lot.
It reveals, I think, a challenge many ministers have, right? I mean,
I feel tremendous empathy for pastors that are in that situation, that, they're put in a situation where they can't doubt, they can't ask questions, and they can't come forward with some of the struggles they might have, because it would threaten their ability to put food on the table for their family. And that sucks.
I was going through, again, sort of the band's history, looking at some of the song titles. Sold Out, He Still Does, Thank God for Something, Faithful, the lyrics from Diamonds, He's making diamonds, diamonds, making diamonds out of dust. He is refining in his timing. He's making diamonds out of us. Oh, the joy of the Lord, it will be my strength. When the pressure is on, he's making diamonds. Is there a point when you're singing those lyrics in front of a mass audience and under the surface you're going, I'm not sure I buy this. Is that happening to you, Jon?
Well, at the time, I really did believe. I really did believe that stuff, and even when I think about it now, I go like, okay, like you could get really metaphysical about it.
I'm not. Look, to be clear, not to interrupt, I'm not asking, Jon, were you lying to your audience?
Yeah,
that's not really my motivation. I want to know how you reconciled your doubts with the message you were presenting.
Yeah, I think that there are certain lyrics that I look back at and go like, okay, that's a little cringy, or other ones that I feel like I can stand by more. But overall, like, I feel like I never really wrote anything that I was like, I definitely don't believe that, but I'm going to sing it anyway. I feel like I always wrestled with stuff, and there was always certain terms that I was uncomfortable using. Like, for instance, I refused to refer to God as king or Jesus as king in any music, even though some Christian music did do that, because I just, something about that felt strange to me. So there was always certain approaches and certain ways of talking about God that I sort of avoided. I was more comfortable saying God than Jesus, and I wasn't always sure why I felt that way. And I think in retrospect, I think probably I felt that way because God is a little more nebulous and Jesus is a little more specific. So I've definitely spent some time thinking about, that stuff and how I feel about it now.
So have you kind of reverse engineered it? Like you sort of stepped out of your faith? Well, it's not a specific God, but now it's kind of an all-loving dad thing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it hinged for me on the Bible. Well, I should say there's sort of two parallel tracks of this deconstruction process for me. There's the experiential side, and then there's the intellectual side. And on the experience side, there was just a lot of things that I have experienced in life over the last, 4 or 5 years that made me go like, wait, like, why is this way? Like, I know we talk about the problem of evil, and that was a big one for me, where I went and did a documentary film in Uganda, and I saw like suffering that you can see it in videos and you can see it in photos and you can hear about it in stories, but seeing it in person is just another thing. And I remember just, I was working with this one organization that has an orphanage, and talking about the situations in which they find these children, like naked, alone in the forest, crying. This is how they're just finding kids abandoned in the forest, like kids the same age as my kids. And so like, I'm faced with this, like, okay, so my children happen to be born where they were born, to the family they were born into. These children, they didn't get to choose to be born here in this circumstance, and they're suffering unimaginably. And I remember coming away being like, man, if God is real and he loves us and he wants to be in relationship with us, and he's a personal God that still interacts in life today, like, I don't know how to square that with what I'm seeing in front of me. That was a huge moment for me, where I was just like, this doesn't make sense.
That argument, we also call it the problem of needless suffering. And I usually hear the response, well, it's a fallen world and God wants to intervene, but he can't. But, then we get into whole other questions about...
Yeah, you get into the free will stuff.
Yeah. And is God limited in any way? Why would an omniscient, omnipotent God be constrained by the word can't? And you and I could spin off into oblivion, probably.
Sure, yeah, and people can and have spun off into oblivion on that one.
All right, so is Hawk Nelson still around, the band?
Well, I mean, we joke that we're still a band. We just don't make music or play shows.
Okay, so you exist, but sort of in the abstract. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We never really did an official like announcement that we're done. Although I would assume that there are those a group of people in Christian music that when I came out and posted that I didn't believe in God anymore, that they would consider that an announcement of not, not being a band anymore.
It was one of my first thoughts was, well, what's the rest of the band do now? But is that a conversation you had? Did you target a conversation to your bandmates before you went public on Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, I had been talking about, so we had decided to sort of wind the band down as far as our involvement in it a few years earlier. So that was already happening. So we were already sort of moving on to other things. And while we were still playing our last few shows and doing our last few things, I had started to ask questions and have some doubts. And so I was talking to the guys about that at that time. So they were aware that I was wrestling with this stuff. And then before I posted, I sent them all a text message and I just said, hey guys, like, just wanted you to know I'm posting this today. I want you to hear it from me. And they were really loving and supportive, and the sort of apparatus around the band, like management and PR and stuff, they scrambled a little bit afterward to release something, and they released a statement a couple days later just because they felt like they needed to address it.
I didn't see the statement. Was it something along the lines of, we wish Jon the best in his journey and we'll be praying for him kind of thing?
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind. And to their credit, they actually sent it to me before they posted it and said, are you comfortable with this? And I was like, well, you don't need my permission. But yes, that's fine. So yeah, it was very kind. It was very loving. But it was also sort of pointing to, upholding what they believe, and that's fine with me.
Sure. Hawk Nelson as a band has not rejected God. This is one.
That is true. Yeah.
So, I mean, did you freak them out when you started to ask these questions? I'm not asking you to betray a confidence, but I mean, you're talking to the guys behind the scenes going, hey, wait a minute. Did you freak them out?
I don't think so, because initially, I mean, it's like you said, it was sort of a stair-step thing. Like initially I was asking questions about some specific theological things or biblical or scriptural things. And that's not new. I mean, plenty of people that believe really strongly, still have questions about stuff. So that, I don't think that was surprising to them. I think as it went on, it started to concern them just on a level where they care about me, and they believe in God and they believe in salvation. And if I'm losing that belief, that's something that matters to them because they care about me. And that applies to a lot of my close Christian friends too.
Jon Steingard, I have this mental image of you on May the 20th, and you've typed out the Instagram post about your not believing in God, but you haven't hit send yet.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, there, once I let this gorilla out, man, once I unleash this, it is forever out there. Did that happen to you?
Yeah. Oh, I knew that when I hit share, my life would change. I just didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. It's like there was a veil, and beyond that action, I didn't know what life looked like. But I just was so ready to feel like my private life and my public life were coherent. I was just so ready to feel transparent. So I remember distinctly hitting post and then pacing around the room, putting my phone down. They're like, I'm not going to look. And I think pretty rapidly I went to the fridge and I cracked a beer, and I was like, this is a moment for a beer.
Like I'm going to let it cook for a while. I'm going to process it. I'm going to just prepare myself. So, the story goes out, a few people see it, and then all of a sudden this story caught fire, probably in a way you never anticipated, right?
Yeah, I did not. About 4 days after I posted, Fox News ran an article, and the article was basically, when I saw the headline, I was like, because I started getting text messages. I was actually on the phone with my dad talking about this stuff, having a follow-up conversation. And I started getting all these like notifications on my phone. And I was like, Dad, something's happening. I got to go. And then I saw the Fox News headline, and it says, Christian singer says he no longer believes in God. And my heart just dropped because I didn't know what the contents of that article was going to be. I mean, like, I immediately was like, well, I don't have control of this narrative. And then I read the article, and it was very fair and factual and just like, hey, this is who Jon is. This is what he said. This is why it might be significant to some people. And after that, it started getting picked up by all these other organizations. I mean, it was like CNN, New York Post, USA Today, NPR, like all these different ones. And from that point on, it definitely took on a life of its own. Yeah.
Fox News, I'm half surprised it wasn't, satanic left sucks up one more victim of God's children.
I actually wrote, I actually reached out on Twitter to the guy that wrote that first article, and I thanked him for, writing an article, because he could have made it a very charged thing. Yeah. And he didn't. It was just very factual. And so I wrote him and thanked him for that. And he wrote me back and said, I grew up listening to Hawk Nelson, and that's why this felt significant to me. And so he was very kind.
Well, that's huge. That's huge. All right. Yeah. So now the cat's out of the bag. You've probably seen the gamut. You've probably seen, like, when I reached out to you, I told you that I was nervous because I don't want to seem opportunistic, right? I don't want that part of me to be like, oh, look, now he's in my camp. Let's talk to him. Sure. Let's expose. More than anything else, I'm interested in kind of your journey. But I'm sure a lot of people, your inbox must have been freaking insane, right?
Yeah. The first week or so, I mean, it consumed my life completely. Like, there was not a moment where I wasn't thinking about it, responding to people, trying to figure out how to respond to certain things. And then on another level, I was like, wow, like, again, like, anytime the pressure came on, I felt like, okay, I wish I had this more figured out than I do. But yeah, I mean, very quickly, what really amazed me is so many people privately ask these questions, privately have doubts, and are terrified to admit it to their friends and family. And so they were reaching out to me to talk, because they saw someone that was struggling with the same things that they were. And I mean, I heard from pastors, I heard from other artists, I heard from, a lot of youth group kids that are struggling with this stuff. And I very rapidly found that I was publicly doing something that a lot of people are privately doing, and that I was very much not alone in that. And that, I mean, the degree to which that's true shouldn't shock me, I guess, but I guess it somewhat did.
So your public stand, perhaps, I know you don't want to come off like, I'm not trying to paint you like, Jon Steingard, superhero, but I mean, this whole idea that you making a public stand sort of helped to validate many of the same doubts and questions that other people navigate in their own lives. They just needed to know somebody else was thinking these thoughts, feeling these feelings, right?
Yeah. And I keep coming back to, like, I feel a particular empathy for people that were raised in Christian environments, because that's what I was. And if you're someone who wasn't raised in the church or in a Christian environment, and then you accept, Jesus into your heart as an adult, and you make that decision to become a Christian, that's a very conscious decision. But for anyone that grows up in the church, like, it's sort of like just the tradition you're raised in, and it's the default mode. And so I feel empathy for people that are raised in Christian homes, because there's this challenge to make your faith your own. And like, how can you know when you have, and like, how do you know when you're making a choice to believe because it's your choice, and how much is it just influenced by the fact that you were raised in that tradition? And it's very hard to parse that out. Even when I'm deconstructing, still to this day, I have certain, tendencies that I'm like, well, why do I have that tendency? Like I value kindness, and I value generosity, and I value, treating the suffering of other people as my responsibility. Like those are things that seem worth doing. And so I'm like, well, why do I value those things? I mean, it's how much is that tied into my upbringing, and how much of that is just, that my parents raised me to care about things that matter. It's hard to parse it out.
So here you are kind of on the other side of the looking glass. I mean, it sounds like your record company, your niche, afforded you the ability to be true to yourself as an artist and as a believer without too much cynicism. But I mean, have you ever looked at, I've looked at the industry and I'm like, marketing, that's marketing, that's marketing, that's marketing. Do you ever look at contemporary Christian music and think, the veneer of it is one of sort of sanctimony and, salvation, rescuing the message. But the truth is there's an awful lot of money in marketing behind the scenes. I mean, you take that wherever you want, Jon. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, no, I have wrestled with that a lot. I always talked about Christian music being this intersection between business, art, and ministry. And different, artists blend those three things differently. And different churches blend those three things differently. I mean, like by and large, most churches are run like businesses. And so, different churches will put emphasis, this church might put, or this artist might put more emphasis on art, this one more on ministry, this one more on running a tight business. And I totally understand the criticisms of certain churches or Christian artists that appear to be all about the money. I think when you criticize them, it's a dangerous road to go down, because it's sort of goes like, well, okay, if a pastor or a musician wants to pursue that as a career, is it fair for them to want to put food on the table? And most people would say, yeah, it's fair for them to want to be able to feed their families. And then you go like, well, okay, well, how well do you want them to be able to feed their families? And like, is it fair for them to have a roof over their head? Well, how nice a roof? And like, it becomes this very difficult to answer question where like, I've had people level at me, like, oh, you were only in Christian music for the money. And I'm just like, well, it's not true to say that I didn't want money. I did want money because I wanted to pay my bills.
Yeah, I mean, you want a good life. I get that.
Yeah, and so like I can't say that I didn't want money, but I also don't believe that that's why I was there primarily. I mean, like, there's way better ways to make a living than Christian music.
Well, and plus, I think anybody who has this illusion that being a road musician, doing
is like this glamorous thing.
I mean, you guys are. I mean, it sounds cliche, but I get it. You guys made a tremendous sacrifice for the time that you were away from your families, sleeping, who knows what the hotel or the bus or whatever's going to look like. Yeah. And I mean, all that stuff.
We did. I mean, we did enjoy it also. I mean, it was a lifestyle that we really loved for a long time. I mean, I was in that touring lifestyle from the age of 20 to about 35 or 36. So that's a long time. So obviously there was things about it that I enjoyed. But yeah, I think the sort of purity test of finances, man, it's a topic that's hard for me to tackle, because certainly there are things I'm uncomfortable with. Like, certainly there are artists that I'm just like, that seems like way more of a cash grab than it is, a ministry. But but and maybe this is my upbringing talking, but the whole like, let he who is without sin cast the first stone thing comes to mind. And I'm just like, well, my deconstruction was not so much to do with seeing how people handled money in Christian music. I know that's a big issue for some people, and there's certainly situations where it's been abused.
Cynicism about the industry didn't push you to the tipping point. I get that.
No. I think the industry came out of a culture, and I think the culture directly is stuff that I felt a little bit more frustrated with. I felt, within Christian music, for instance, most Christian artists think it's fine to have a drink, but no Christian artist will go on Instagram and allow a picture of themselves to be posted with a drink. And that's because the Christian audience, a large percentage of them still believe that drinking is not okay. And so we don't want to piss off those people. So we sort of like let them believe that we don't drink. And that dichotomy, that kind of thing is what always, like, that's an example of something that made me uncomfortable. I'm like, why do I need to present myself as being different than what I am? And I know certain people would push back and say, like, well, it's just, it's not, you're not presenting yourself differently. You're just being careful not to offend people. And I'm like, I don't know. It feels like I'm presenting myself differently.
This is a loaded question. You don't have to answer it. When I was in Christian radio, I stumbled across, back in the green rooms, true believers. I mean, look, I don't have a problem with somebody making even a good living doing what they're passionate about and what they're talented at. And that includes people. And at the time, I believed that about people in ministry. Now, if you promise others manna from heaven at the end of an offering plate, that's a whole other thing. But if you're selling albums and that kind of stuff, I didn't have a problem with that. But I walked away from some of those encounters with a firm conviction that some of these people, and again, you don't have to go here, some of these people, this was the gig they could get. Like, they may not be even God believers, but that's their thing. They're on the album cover. They're making it work. They're kind of punching the clock. Jon Steingard, you going to touch that one? I mean, I'm not asking for names, but come on.
There are certainly those in that situation, for sure. I get
emails from people who play in Christian bands touring the world. And they're in the band going, look, I don't believe, but I'm a studio musician. This is kind of what I got, and they're just candid with me, but they can't be candid with anybody else,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, I sort of feel like the majority of the people that are in Christian music that are wrestling with doubts privately, or like that have found themselves not believing privately, I think the majority of them did believe in one way or another when they got into it. I think it's very rare that someone's like, yeah, I don't believe in God, but I'm going to get into Christian music anyways. Like, I think that's pretty rare. But what I see more of is, people a little bit more like myself, where like over time you start to develop doubts and have questions, and you go like, well, that doesn't seem quite right. And then you start learning more and more and go like, oh, well, actually there's some legitimate questions here about these beliefs. But then you might find yourself 10 years into a career with not a lot of other skills. And, this is the best way for you to make a living. And, I feel a lot of empathy for people in that situation, because that's a hard thing to face.
Sure. It's kind of a sunk cost thing. I mean, you're so deep in the well. I mean, what else am I going to do? John, I see you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up on that. I actually think that's not unique to people in the spotlight. I actually think that there's a lot of people that are not so much public figures, but maybe they grew up in a culture and an environment where that belief was the norm, and maybe their family all believes and their friends all believe. And for them to publicly say that they don't believe, or that they're wrestling with belief, would disturb their social lives and their personal relationships so much that they're not sure it's worth doing. So I don't think it's a thing that's unique to people that are sort of in the public eye.
What happens to you now, man? You know, I mean, here you are.
I don't know.
You are now in a place where a few years ago you thought if someone had said, this is going to happen to you, Jon Steingard, you probably would have shaken your head. Here you are. Come on.
I don't think I would have been 100% shocked, because I did have these little lingering feelings all the way through. But I think I would have been like, really, in the future, I've got the balls to say it publicly. I mean, now I still do film work. That's my how I, pay the bills. That's how I put food on the table for my family. About half of my client base are either Christian organizations or Christian, labels or Christian bands. And I really accepted a possibility that all of that would evaporate when I posted this, and quite a bit of it hasn't, which I actually feel really grateful for. Like, I had a few Christian artists reach out, or Christian labels reach out and be like, hey, like, we saw what you posted. If you don't want to work on Christian stuff anymore, we totally understand, but we really like working with you. If you still want to, help us make videos here and there, we'd love to do that. And so I think that was pretty cool of them.
Does that produce kind of a moral conundrum? Like, if the message isn't true, but I'm being hired to produce the content, how does that work in your head?
No, it doesn't feel like a moral conundrum for me. I already was declining projects that made me feel uncomfortable. So I'm still doing that.
So you see yourself as kind of a contractor. They hire you.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair way to look at it. I mean, I don't work with any organizations that I feel like are doing something morally wrong. And we can get into the morality issue later if you want to, but for instance, like I recently did a video just a couple weeks ago for this artist, this worship artist named Phil Wickham, and he's here in San Diego. I've known him for years and years. I've done video content for him for ages. And, he's writing worship songs for the church, and he believes in what he's doing very strongly. And if I felt like he was going around intentionally lying to people or like doing horrible things, then I wouldn't work with him. But I don't feel that way about him. I sort of feel the way I would feel if like a local Buddhist monastery reached out to me and was like, we want you to create a video for our monastery. I would look at that as like, wow, what an interesting thing to be a part of. Like, I'm sure I could learn something there. And I would be comfortable doing that too. So I don't feel like my beliefs have to line up exactly with every one of my clients. If I did that, I wouldn't have any clients.
One of the angles I take, being an ex-fundamentalist, and Sure. It's hard, I think, for some people to, from the outside of the terrarium, to feel this. And I get it. A lot of people have been really damaged by religious cultures, but
Sure, yeah.
I'm surrounded by devout Christians who are lovely, beautiful, moral, caring human beings. We disagree on the God question. I think in many ways, I think they may be victims of bad ideas. But this idea that they wouldn't give you the shirt off their back, they wouldn't help you in a crisis, they don't genuinely love or care. I mean, we tend to put people in these little boxes. And that's been it sounds like that many of the believers in your circle, they didn't cast you out, right? I mean,
I was actually really impressed with the people, that I'm closest to and the way that they responded. I sort of look at it two ways. On one hand, they were incredibly kind, and loving and supportive, and continue to check in on me, actually. But there is this sort of separation that I sense, and in a lot of ways, I don't know that it's possible for that not to be the case. But there's certainly this feeling of like, oh, we're not on the same thing, team anymore, or we're not on the same perspective anymore. We don't hold the same worldview anymore.
I mean, is that on their side mostly? I mean, is it kind of like, the sheep and the goats kind of mentality, or?
Well, I mean, I sort of look at it as like, when you're single, most of your friends are single and you have a lot in common with those people. So it's natural that you're close to them. When you have kids, you discover that it's a little bit more of a challenge to retain all your friendships with your single friends, because your life just looks so different and your priorities are different. Your perspective is different. And then as you go over the next few years as a parent, you discover that, I realize now that most of my friends are also parents, and it's because you have stuff in common with them. You see things similarly, and you struggle with some of the same things. And so I think it's natural for there to be a distance when my Christian friends, if they feel like there's a bit of a distance between us now, like I feel, I don't think that. I think that's sort of a natural result of the process.
Some of that happening with your family? I mean, mom and dad? Do you feel that?
No, actually, with my family, I feel like I'm talking with them more than I ever have, or more than I have as an adult, like more than I have in a long time. I
mean, are those heated exchanges? Like, are they?
No, I mean, we're certainly talking about deep issues more often. My mom and I have an email thread going back and forth talking about the problem of suffering, and it's really an interesting conversation. And I actually feel like I've gone way deeper with my family and my wife's family actually through this process. That's been one of the surprising benefits of this whole thing. Is I actually feel like the people that I'm close. You know what it is? I'm realizing this as we're talking. I feel like the people that I'm closest to, this process drew them in closer. And people that I'm more peripherally friends with, those people maybe it pushed away a little bit.
So you, the singer-songwriter, you go back into the studio. What are you writing songs about? I mean, I haven't actually. Yeah, I haven't written a song since October 2017. Are you out of that sandbox? Are those days over?
Yeah. I mean, for right now, yeah. I mean, songwriting is a tremendously difficult way to make a living.
But I mean, isn't that a fire in your belly? I mean, artists make art, man.
Yeah. You know what's funny is that I never felt that. I never felt like I had this. My entire career as a musician was always like, I really like what this, making music. I really like the life that I can live because of it. I like traveling. I like meeting people. I like, participating in concerts because there is something sort of, for lack of a better word, transcendent about the live music experience. And I haven't just experienced that in Christian music. I've experienced that at a Coldplay concert. And that was one of the things that got me wondering, actually. I'm just like, well, that's interesting. I feel the same thing here that I feel in like a worship setting. But yeah, I never, as time went on, making music began to feel like more and more of a burden for me. And the making of our last album, I went into like a pretty severe depression because I felt this pressure to follow up, the previous one, which had done fairly well. And I was also at the very beginning of doubting. And so I was very confused and I was unsure of myself. And in that setting, I had the pressure to write a hit album. And that pressure just wrecked me.
Nostradamus Andrews, I'm going to make a prediction, John. I think that after some time, after the kids get a little older, I mean, I see you back,
maybe
making music.
Maybe that'll be real interesting.
I mean, I'd be interested to see what the message looks like in 5 years. you know.
I would be interested in that too.
Are you doing good? I mean, would you go back to May 20th and just not hit the send button on this deal?
No.
Do you ever have those moments?
No, once you're unplugged from the matrix, you can't go back. And that's how my wife and I both feel about this whole process. It's like what I mean, what am I going to wish for? Like to go back to a time where I wasn't open about how I felt, or do I go back a little bit further to where my doubts were less formed? Like, I don't know. I can't. I'm not someone that looks backwards that way. I tend to look forward, and you know, for what I see for the future now. I mean, I've had a few really interesting things come out of this process for me. Like, one of them is I feel more motivated to get involved with causes that alleviate the suffering of other people. I feel more motivated than ever on that. And part of that is just the realization that, like, I no longer have the excuse that God has this under control. You know, now if I see suffering and if it bothers me, I can't trust that anything's going to happen to make that suffering better if I don't take it upon myself to be a part of doing something about it. And so I feel more motivated than ever to get involved in causes both abroad and locally. I mean, here in San Diego, I discovered recently that 500,000 people in San Diego County are what's called food insecure, which means that they do not have access to food on a regular basis enough to like live what I would consider a normal life. That they have to make decisions to sacrifice other things just to eat, or to eat when they can. I mean, this is America. This is San Diego. 500,000 people. That's staggering.
Well, too, I think in my own case, I remember thinking, now that I don't have the excuse, I guess excuse is the word. I mean, we used to have this mindset that, you know, you put your hands together and, dear Lord, we ask that you help the suffering today.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was off the hook. Like, oh, fine. Now I just gave it to God. Now here, pass the salt, right? But when you start seeing that if there is no divine intervention and we are the solution to each other's problems, it requires more than some incantation. I'm going to have to get my hands into the mix, right?
Yeah, and I feel really motivated about that right now. So I certainly like. I don't say that to say that Christianity has never done anything to help the poor. I mean, there's certainly a ton of organizations that are Christian organizations that are doing great work, and I still support, you know, organizations like we sponsor a child through this organization called Food for the Hungry, and the organization I went to Uganda with, they're called Hope Ministries Uganda. They're a Christian organization. They're feeding, educating, and clothing 250 Ugandan orphans in a building the size of my house. And my house is not big,
wow.
by the way.
Well, I mean, that's another, I think, controversial but valid point. Now, again, I think they're doing humanism, but this idea that all churches are corrupt and all pastors are millionaires and blah, blah, they're all living tax-free, high on the hog. You have no idea what you're talking about. Most pastors could make more money in another profession. They're on the clock 24/7. And it's true that a lot of churches genuinely involve themselves in a humanitarian way in the lives of their parishioners and community, feeding hungry people, funding medical causes. Again, I think they could do so without all the superstitious window dressing. But I mean, that's an important distinction to make. I mean, again, good people doing good work. It's just that they sort of flavor it with Christianity or whatever.
And certainly, like, you know, there are situations where good work is done with a wink, you know, or
with an ulterior motive. Yeah.
And, you know, again, it depends what you mean by ulterior. You know, from their point of view, they're serving both their immediate physical needs and their eternal needs. And so if you hold the beliefs that those people hold, then they're doing the right thing, you know. But I definitely also see the problematic nature of lacing physical help with a spiritual perspective. it's certainly not without its problems.
We always framed it from the New Testament perspective, like Jesus went out and he fed people physically before he fed them spiritually. So when I say ulterior motive, it was usually let's go in and make sure their physical needs are met so we can then give them the message of the gospel.
Sure. Yeah.
Those types of things.
Yeah. And I kind of look at that and from some of the stuff I've seen, I'm like, look, if you're the child who doesn't have a meal and then has a meal, I think he's most concerned with the fact that he has a meal. You know what I mean? So like I have a hard time throwing the baby out with the bathwater is I guess what I'm saying. Yeah. That like, you know, I totally understand the perspective that it might be cleaner and more and better for everyone to have a more humanist approach. But I also look at the boots on the ground and I go like, well, I'd rather these organizations are doing what they're doing than not have them at all, at least at the moment.
All right, Jon, you've been kind with your time. You've been very generous to have a conversation here. Somebody is watching and navigating or just navigated or they're on a journey or they relate to you. What would you say to somebody who was experiencing doubt, confusion? You know, they're having that sort of undercurrent. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, these conversations are my favorite ones to have these days. And I would say that don't ever let people make you feel guilty for asking questions. The truth is not afraid of questions. If someone is afraid of your questions, it generally is because they have questions too. And they're afraid to ask those questions themselves. And so don't be afraid to ask questions. But at the same time, I would say it is possible to go through this process with kindness. Because what I see a lot of times is people that go through this process experience a lot of anger and resentment towards the faiths that they're walking away from. And I'm not saying there's never a reason to feel those things, but as long as you're angry, your judgment's going to be clouded by that anger. And your search for truth is more likely to be a search for whatever will refute the thing that you desire to refute. And so as much as possible, if you can process that anger and that frustration in a healthy way, acknowledge it, don't stuff it down. But recognize that like, if you processing this stuff in kindness and empathy and understanding, is a much better way to get at the truth of things. And it's a much better way to retain the parts of your life that are good that you maybe want to hold on to.
Jon Steingard, you may have inadvertently titled this podcast when you said the truth is not afraid of questions. Like, I want to put that on a freaking t-shirt, right?
Yeah.
The truth is not afraid of questions. Man, I hope your journey continues to be a fulfilling and good one. If nothing else, your journey has brought us together in conversation. I made a new friend, and I'm honored.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. I appreciate that, man.
So I can feel that I'm, sort of watching the audience and seeing their support of you. We're going to follow you and what you're about. All my best in your endeavors. And if there's ever anything we can do to support you, you just have your people call our people, and we'll do the thing, okay?
All right. Thanks so much, Seth.
It's a real pleasure.
All right. Take care.